Talking to this guy is easy, because he always gets to the point. Here's a look at the new Mattel Master Universe Origins, Spikor, Untouchable Master of Evil Combat. Covered head to toe in spikes, the evil blacksmith Spikor crafts much of Skeletor's nefarious arsenal. When I look at a character like Spikor, I see a guy who wants personal space. Judging by the fact he has spikes across his head and all across the top of his torso, I'm more willing to give it. Of course, before we get a closer look at the brand new Master Universe Origins Spikor, let's grab the tape measure and see how tall the figure stands. Build-wise, he's going to be the same as all the other Master Universe Origins figures. And of course, I'll bring in a couple for comparison's sake in a second. Though Spikor stands about 5 1/4 inches in height, or the figure is going to be about 13.5 centimeters tall. As for other figures, seeing as we are looking at Spikor, I thought I would bring in other figures that also have their names ending in or. So here's what the figure looks like with Skeletor. Here's what the figure looks like with Ninjor. And here's what the figure looks like with Mosquitor. Actually, just before we look at Spikor, I did want to bring in the packaging that the figure comes contained inside. On the back is always an advertised image of what the character is doing, usually in the middle, and then off to the sides are usually in teasers, either in the foreground or usually also in the background. Can't help but notice the original 1985 Rock People Rokon, and then off to the side here, there's Extendar, likely going to be 2 figures we're going to be getting from future waves. I'm glad to see that we're going to be branching the line of Master Universe Origins into the realm of the Rock People. Can't wait for those. Though on to the figure's things that he comes included with. You notice I resisted the urge to say accessories, just because the things on this side I wouldn't really consider accessories, like a paper, for example, just to tell you the things that can be swapped out on Spikor. If you have the courage, you can remove his head, you can take the arms off and the lower torso as well as his boots. Do a little bit of mixing and matching if you wanted to. As well, the figure also comes included with a comic book. The comic book had a little bit of tear on the back there, but actually right at the top corner there. But I think it survived most of it. And even if it was slightly damaged, I still actually have the other figures we will be looking at from this wave. But the mini comic included is the Fading Fortress. Being that I also ordered this online, I don't even know what it is the case now with Canadian stores, because Canada, I mean, good luck even finding Master Universe anything now in Canadian stores. But I had to order this online, and you can see now inside there's also some featured images, including a brand new Man-at-Arms, one figure I'm really looking forward to reviewing, as he will be coming up shortly. Advertised on the back are also advertisements for Squeeze, Snake Man Infiltrator, and Serpent Claws Man-at-Arms. Again, we will be looking at those in upcoming videos. We're going to move the mini comic out of the way, and let's look at the accessories finally, that come included with Spikor. First of all, the figure has quite a spiky club. The club spikes, luckily you'll be knowing, won't be drawing any bit of blood. They are fairly large though, and you can imagine they would inflict some serious damage. By the fact that the figure has only just the one hand, because the other hand is being occupied by his trident, obviously there's only really one option. You can take this and clip this into his hand, and it sits fairly well. I mean, you're not going to have any issues where it's going to be falling out of his hand. And of course, that's the only hand that he has to work with, because the other hand, literally on the other hand, the figure also comes included with a trident. Now, the original 1985, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Spikor would have actually had a gimmick built in where the actual trident would have been something that would have whipped out. It had to sacrifice, unfortunately, a bend in his elbow, and what ultimately resulted in the original vintage toy having more straight arm on this side. But when he did twist his waist, it actually would fly out the trident and basically would just project out. You'd be able to slide it out independently, or again, if you twisted his waist, springing it back would also pop this out as well. What Mattel has done differently, though, in order to accommodate the additional articulation in the elbow joints, the figure unfortunately has to have then 2 different variations of trident. This one actually already has the extended trident, which the original vintage toy would have had this in all vac chrome finish. And then he also has one that's more stuck in or kind of retracted into it than his forearm. If you're looking for more just the way of displaying the figure on the shelf, I prefer myself to have the trident inward, just because it's not going to be taking up as much space. Again, if you wanted to swap out the trident, simply just a case of taking your existing figure. Let's first of all remove the club here for a second. Take the trident, and all you're going to want to do is just pop this off the forearm. Now, one thing, unfortunately, though, about the forearm is normally hands are something using the same size of peg. But if this is something I'm going to be popping out frequently, I would think that the peg should have been a little bit bigger than this, just for the risk that could potentially snap. Popping then in the new trident, again, it has now the longer blade. And again, the original vintage toy would have only had this as a sliding out feature if, again, you sprung or twisted the waist, spring this forward would also slide this out as well. But ultimately what it had to mean is that his arm always was in a permanently molded straight arm like this. Luckily, you don't get that now with the Master Universe Origins. So I guess this is one of those cases where doing away with the gimmick kind of does benefit now the newer figure, because now you get the additional articulation bend in the elbow that really wasn't there before. Getting now a closer look at Spikor, looking like the original vintage Spikor, I think released in 1985. I think what was rather ironic, though, is that he was released in 1985, and I think most, if not all of them, were produced in Malaysia. The figure actually, in a way, looks like durian fruit, which I think is a delicacy, a fruit that many people in Malaysia enjoy to eat. The spikes on his body are actually very similar to the original vintage toy. They're not made of hard plastic. You can see that when you're bending them, they're made of very soft plastic. Unlike Lego, this would be a figure that you probably wouldn't still not want to step on in the middle of the night, but it probably wouldn't be as hurtful to step on as if you were stepping on a Lego 2x4. The figure itself, though, does look like the original vintage self. It sort of has what I could best describe a cross between a porcupine and a pig. I'm guessing it's supposed to be looking more like a porcupine. But again, like all the spikes on the top of his head are very soft and plastic. They're actually more of kind of a rubbery plastic. I noticed, though, on my figure that the head is a little on the looser side. From what I've seen of other videos, it seems to be consistent that most of the figure's heads are all very loose. Again, like the body is just simply an overlaid armor piece. Now with this, you wouldn't really be able to detach this. Normally would be the case with armor. You would just detach it on the sides for the straps and then you would just remove it. Now this would be looking as if they probably have used a completely retooled body. Something that's very unique to, obviously, Spikor, because, of course, you wouldn't be able to remove this. It looks like it's probably just an overlaid rubbery piece over top of probably a very basic buck body underneath it. But the arms, of course, are still something that's consistent with all the other Master Universe Origins figures, right down to the fact that he also has the little gauntlet bracelets, and also can be said as well for the lower legs. The lower legs, though, like the original vintage toy, has the loincloth done here in a black plastic, painted the belt then in red, and then the lower boots, a little jarring, though, from the black, you get treated to a chocolate brown instead. It's a really nice looking figure. I kind of wish, at one point when I was going through Kmart as a kid, I remember seeing Spikor on the shelf. By that point, I don't know if I was really collecting really as much Master Universe stuff at the time. I would have really liked to have picked this up as a kid, though. For the figure's articulation, going back to his head sculpt, once again, it's going to be on a ball joint, so it does allow the head to rotate all the way around. The head does look down, it looks up, and of course it rocks back and forth, but you're only going to get as much mileage as this, moving it back and forth. The waist does swivel, but like all the Master Universe Origins, except for, I think, 2 exceptions, the only thing that this figure can actually do is twist this if you're manually doing it. It doesn't spring back, it doesn't have a built-in spring or anything like that. Arms do rotate, though, all the way around. You can hinge them outward. The figure does have now a bend in the elbow, and hey now, because he also now is a brand new figure with Master Universe Origins, he now possesses something that the original vintage toys couldn't say that he had. He has actually a hinge on this side. Again, the original vintage toy would have had just the arm straight like this. He now at least benefits from a newer articulation point in the elbow. For all intents and purposes, the trident does also rotate all the way around. Again, this doesn't slide in and out. If you did want to accommodate that, you would have to then replace it back to the original retracted version, but there's no articulation here at all. Legs do split out. They're on ball joints. You can take the legs and move them forward. You can move them back. Has a little bit of a swivel at the top of the thigh, a single hinge only in the knee, which also allows the lower leg to rotate. There's a lower leg rotation here in the boot, and you can also move the ankle back and forth this way and back and forth this way as well. I'm not even going to bore you guys by telling you guys you can also bend the knees if you want to have them look more like the vintage self. But all in all, though, a nice looking figure of Spikor. Kind of, again, does look a little bit like a durian fruit. I remember having a durian fruit once. That's all have you ever had a durian fruit? Let me know down below. I always keep saying that because looking at the way they've done his body, especially in his torso and his head, he looks a little bit like a durian fruit. But again, a nice looking figure. The colors are consistently done here to look like the original vintage Spikor. The colors of the blue and the colors of the purple are about matching the same, and even the teal that he has, the very rich coloring of teal around the spikier collar and down the front sections of his body are also consistently handled here from the original vintage toy. Yeah, really liking the look of Spikor. And even though we really haven't looked at the other 3 figures from this wave, that being Squeeze, Snake Man Infiltrator, and Serpent Claw Man-at-Arms, I feel like this one might be my favorite of the 4. While losing the gimmick, yes, Spikor still inherits all the cool colors that the original vintage figure has, and you can tell what faction the figure works for, as he does have very familiar Skeletor colors. The purples and that bluish purple that he has for the majority of his spiky head and spiky torso work really well with the teal, the black, and the red. You would imagine that with all the colors that they used between this one and the original retro toy, that the colors would clash, and yet surprisingly it works okay. The black and the red, and especially the brown that he has in his boots, don't work maybe as well, but somehow all come together for a really interesting looking figure. And while I was expecting initially that Spikor would have had harder plastic on his head and on his torso, like with the original vintage toy, they went the route more of a softer rubbery plastic. So again, if you're walking in your bare feet or walking around in the middle of the night and you don't see what's on the floor, you don't have to worry as much you're going to be stepping on Spikor as say if you would be stepping on Lego. I can say that as personal experience. Stepping on Lego in the middle of the night when you don't realize there's Lego on the floor can be quite painful. But what do you guys think of Spikor? Let me know down below in the comments section. Did you ever have the original Spikor? And do you miss the fact that the figure now does away with the gimmick in favor of a swapped out hand? Personally, though, I mean, this is one gimmick on a figure, and I would have to go from obviously a character-to-character basis. Spikor, I'm okay with the idea that they had to do away with the gimmick, because keep in mind that the original vintage figure had to have a straight arm in order to have a part that, of course, the rest of the Trident would be able to slide inside of. Doing away with that, swapping out the arms. Now, granted, I still wish that they could have used a larger ball peg instead of the smaller peg that they ended up using, but I can understand in a case like Spikor why they had to do away with the gimmick in favor of two swappable Tridents. But again, what do you guys think of the figure? Let me know down below in the comments section. Also, as well, if you guys enjoyed this video, want to hit with a like. If you guys are loving your content, loving this content that you're seeing on a regular basis, and you're certainly on board to see the rest of the Master Universe Origins line that we will be looking at, that again includes the Snake Man Infiltrator, Squeeze, I'm saying that only because he has 3 S's, and Serpent Claw Man-at-Arms. We will be looking at those guys in upcoming reviews. Hitting that bell notification as well will also ensure that you're getting notifications of every single new video that the person behind the camera is posting. Of course, as always, guys, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.